Welcome to all of you who've joined us today from wherever you are on the planet for this opportunity that we have that will give us the moment that we've been waiting for. Global Minnesota has been honored for a number of years, but especially this year to be host for United States State Department named International Women of Courage. This is important to us because we are an organization that was 70 years ago founded by women of courage. And this has been an important theme throughout our history, that courage that it takes to stand up, that courage that it takes to make change, that courage that it takes to lead. And these very special guests, and we'll have two of those women of courage with us here today, represent for the U.S. State Department their deep commitment and their abiding commitment to supporting women throughout the planet and recognizing leaders and doing it in this very special way. So this International Women of Courage program has been a program of our U.S. State Department for a number of years. Global Minnesota is pleased to be hosting this roundtable discussion this morning. We have two of those women of courage from South Africa, Roshanda Pasco, who will be joining us on the screen here in a few moments, and from Liberia, Farcia Harris, who is the second of the honorees that we are hosting at Global Minnesota. We have partners that make this possible, and of course, the U.S. State Department, their Office of International Visitors. We partner with them each year. Sometimes as many as 400 or more visitors are coming through Minnesota. This is one of the most special of those programs, but they are a partner of ours that goes back to the 1950s. The Office of Global Women's Issues within that Office of International Visitors is specifically responsible for this program, and they are doing it in partnership with Meridian International Center based there in Washington, D.C. The Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota is our special partner. And for many of us in our region, they are a beacon of light and also a North Star. The Humphrey Institute, as it was called before, and now the Humphrey School is one of the very special places. And we're really pleased to be joined by Professor Dr. Dipali Mukhopadhyay, who was being the moderator for our program today. We greatly appreciate her participation and the Humphrey School as one of our main partners. So we're going to flash back just a few months. The announcement of the 2022 International Women of Courage Award was in a ceremony with our nation's First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. We were going to hear directly from the U.S. Embassy in Liberia and the Embassy in South Africa. We have some video messages where they did really formal introductions. Really great to see our embassies around the world recognizing courageous women wherever they are. So please, will our tech crew bring forth those two introductory videos? Thank you.
On behalf of the entire U.S. Embassy team here in Liberia, I am so excited to introduce you to Ms. Farcia Borjeno Harris as one of the Secretary of State's 2022 International Women of Courage. Ms. Harris is the first Liberian to be honored with this important distinction. But she's part of a distinguished community of women leaders in Liberia who work every day to address the issues of women's rights and gender equality, helping to dismantle the obstacles that women unfortunately still face here. Ms. Harris, supported throughout her life by her mother, Nyama Harris, and her aunt, Willamette D. Harris, represents a generation of women who had to come of age during the country's Civil War and overcame immense challenges to gain an education. Her commitment to help protect girls from school-based sexual harassment and unplanned or early pregnancy is essential to stop a vicious cycle that limits women's participation in every professional sector by normalizing assault and curtailing women's education. The networks of activists and Liberian feminists she helped establish organized the country's first independent women-led protests against gender-based violence in 2018, and her bravery to stand up to counter protesters and aggressive security personnel were pivotal during a 3-day anti-rape protest in August 2020 that directly led President George Weah declaring rape a national emergency and announcing other initiatives crucial to protecting Liberian women. We urge the government to follow through on their commitments with all due speed. We are so proud to be able to introduce Ms. Harris and to recognize her as an international woman of courage.
Hello, I'm Richard.
I'm so proud to be here today to introduce Roshanda Pasco from Cape Town, South Africa, as our International Women of Courage awardee. In July 2016, Shanda witnessed a brutal murder of a young man by a gang member. The killer stared directly at Shanda, only a few feet away from her, threatening her as he continued to stab the young man. Shanda knew the victim well, and she comforted him while he lay dying in the street. And due largely to her credibility as a peace activist, gang members began to harass her and they threatened her in an effort to silence her. When she persisted, they broke into her home and fired guns at her colleagues, and even at her children. But thanks to her courageous testimony, a South African court convicted the perpetrators and they issued the maximum prison sentences. Despite these sentences, the gang leader maintained a hit on Shanda, and she and her family continue to this day to live in hiding. Shanda embodies the truth. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather it's pushing on despite that fear. The entire U.S. mission to South Africa and I are pleased and privileged to present Shanda Pasco as an International Women of Courage awardee. We thank her for her service, for her sacrifice, and for her commitment to the human rights and dignity of all people.
My team at the
We're thankful to the U.S. State Department and to our embassies for providing those wonderful introductions. And now I would like to invite to the screen our moderator for today. I briefly mentioned Dr. Mukupas Dihali is our associate professor here at our Humphrey School of Public Affairs. She focuses in the global policy area with research focusing on the relationship between political violence, state building, and governance during and after war, a topic that is on all of our minds day and night, I am guessing, of knowing the crowd that's here watching today. She's currently serving as a senior expert on the Afghanistan peace process for the U.S. Institute of Peace. Some of you know Global Minnesota's former and future board chair was the charge d'affaires in Afghanistan during the last couple of years, and we had a very special program that I hope some of you were able to see this week on those last few months in Afghanistan. So we are really thrilled to have this kind of expertise and this kind of global thinker joining us today as a moderator. So thank you very much. I'd like to also invite our International Women of Courage to join me on this screen. I think there was a little bit of internet disruption at a moment. So Rui there, Chando, here we go. Farcia, hello, welcome. I turn it over to you, Dibali.
Thank you so much, Mark, and welcome, Ms. Harris. It's such a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you all for joining. I think it may just be the two of us for a little while, so we'll just get the conversation started. I wonder, Ms. Harris, if you can start by telling us a bit about your own journey. How is it that you came to find your voice as an activist in Liberia?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone from Monrovia, Liberia. This has been a journey, interesting one. Grew up in the civil crisis. So the 1990, we had the first physical invasion in Liberia. So about that time, I was around the age of 8, 9 years old. So basically, I grew up in the chaos. I grew up in the violence, and I saw at first hand mayhem, maltreatment. I may not have understood the context of why it all was happening, but being exposed to violent killing, looting, seeing child soldiers. So all of what had happened in a way triggered, what I believe was already a call for me, that is to be able, activism and all of that. So when I was growing up, started asking questions in school, especially to my female teachers, as to why certain things were happening, why there were injustices. So for example, a simple question would be, why is it that we don't have a lot of girls coming to school? Or why is it that, some of us come to school neatly dressed, whilst others are not neatly dressed, they can barely have the shoes, proper shoes on their feet. And she would say, someday you understand everything. But with their experiences from the war and the level of violence we suffered, we had the end of the civil crisis in 2003. At that time, I was just graduating secondary school and going to the university. So once I got at the university, I saw a second phase again of inequalities. Just the fact that some of our friends could not afford school fees, could not afford to stay in school. There will be school fees problems all of the time. And sometimes not everyone have access to quality education from where we are. But then again, we had just come from the war. So there was this thing that we need to not leave anyone behind. We need to continue. So that drive, that passion out, and we decided to start organizing. We didn't have a structured way to do it. We wanted to see our friends who had started the semester come back to school, and that we all could just go through the university together. So we started to fundraise, to have programs that will allow us get some money, but also to be able to deal with, in our own way, understanding some of the issues that the girls, the young women who are dropped out of school have expressed. So some will say, I can't come to school because I'm a mother, the teenage pregnancy was very hard. I'm a mother, I can't afford to fend for my child and keep myself in the university. So we will organize campus-based conversations. The Female Lawyers Association will come around. They will have seminars and all of those things. So that's the whole thing. That's the driving force as to where I've come. And once I started in 2005 organizing on the university campus, I have not stopped. We've taken it from the university campus. We've come to do community organizing. We've continued to do national organizing to focus on different issues, but specifically sexual gender-based violence, and the call for equality and equal participation of women in national leadership. So that's the driving force. That's how it has been since the war. All of those experiences that we had kind of built on our, kind of inform us as to why our voices are needed in the different spaces to be able to ensure that we fight injustices and call for equality.
I mean, what's so inspiring about your story when I was learning about your life is that you began your work at a very young age, and then you were clearly driven in each chapter of your life and your career to push this activist agenda. And I think one thing that it would be wonderful for you to talk about for our audience is that often I think in the West, when we talk about women's rights and we talk about questions of gender-based violence, for example, we sometimes talk about women as if they need to be saved or rescued or protected by outsiders. I work on Afghanistan, and this has often been the narrative. But your work reveals the power of women in a place like Liberia and the political project that you have all been undertaking through your activism. And so I wonder if you can share with us a little bit what your agency has meant to you, what it has looked like for you not to be the object of somebody else coming in and saving you, but in fact standing up and redefining your own society in your own terms. Can you share with us a little bit about how you conceive of your work in that way and the power that you bring to it?
So one of the things that I keep telling, I said the other day, and I was smiling to somebody, I need to sit down probably and catalog, what my agency is or has been and continue to be. But one of the things that I see, and you made a point on that most often we think women want to be rescued, women want to be, safe, or they want to be given the easy way out, or things on the pedestal. But I didn't see it that way growing up. I grew up with my grandmother, and by the time I was born, my grandfather had died. So she was a single mother. To her children, including my father, were adults in a way. But I still saw how my grandmother carry on her life, how she stood out for her community, how she invested in the harmony of her community, how she was a voice of reasoning in her community. That inspired me. And then I went on, as life went on, the crisis came, I went into the home of my aunt, who also was a single mother, and I saw how she fought to educate us, she fought to instill in us, values that you will bring harmony in our community, values that taught us that we all were equal. We are supposed to treat people fairly and treat ourselves as we want others to treat us. So that inspired me. I'm quiet, I listen a lot, but I observe. So, and I still struggle to feel to say what I'm an introvert, but I'm a very shy person. So I observe and I take inspiration from things that speak to my soul. So I saw how these women led, and we had our own ups and downs, our family, right? But I saw how they led, and I was inspired comparing my home with homes of other in the community where there was a father and there was a mother. I also further the history, of Liberian women, and particularly when the civil crisis were ending, we started to count how many peace talks have been held that failed to bring peace and disarmament to Liberia. So the minute the women intervened in Accra, that, stir up something in me. I was still in high school, but then I would go and smile, to myself when I listened to the radio and how the women were organizing on the fish market. And then they made their way to Accra. And I would say again, it wasn't in context as to, understanding now, we'll put it in context and see how they were fighting patriarchal, the system and the power and all of that. But I just knew that the women were daring, they were doing something. So that also boosted my own agency to say, you have suffered a lot, Farcia. I've had my share of sexual gender-based violence. I've had my share of, different things that will be enough to say, be quiet. But every time I read about a Liberian woman that stood up and did something very impactful, even though women were genuinely marginalized or kept out of mostly out of decision-making spaces and their voices weren't considered as important as men, but yet and still they had their feet in the trenches of the changes that were being made, even though they were hardly recognized, as part of the change that was happening. That critical placing and positioning of women's contribution had not been done, but that was something that spoke to me. So after the peace talk, and then the WhipNet women will be on the field every time. We had Lema Bowie coming, and then we have Madam Salif come. So I would just go back to say, okay, for example, we had Angie Brooks Randall, right, who out of everything rose to becoming, to taking a very high position at the United Nations. So all of those spoke to me that women are indeed not just asking for the space, but they have the agency to make change, to impact change, though their stories are not being documented or being placed at the center of these changes or given the needed recognition, but they were making changes. They were standing out against the odds. So in our current reality, that has been able to allow us make the level of progress that we've made. I know it's not just me, but the fact that Liberian women could say that we will elect a female president, that was the icing on the cake. So we used that in 2005 in the classroom. We took that message back to the classroom, back to the communities, that we see all of these barriers, but the fact that one woman could make it to the presidency, it means that there is something that we carry as women, and we cannot allow for our voices to be buried. We have to continue shouting until we are given seats at the table. We don't have many seats at the table right now in terms of decision making and representation, and the backlash from Madam Salif's presidency have come 100-fold on us, and we are re-strategizing and thinking how to counter all the backlashes. But our voices, our agency can no longer be ignored. That's where we are. That's how our work are being inspired. That's the message we take back to the classroom, to the younger girls. We take back to the community to tell women that we already making changes. We already have what it takes to lead. We've been leading in different ways, though not recognized, but it's happening. Yeah.
I mean, there's such power and strength in the language that you use to describe the work you've been doing, but also the way you situate yourself in a lineage of other women who have been leading, and that's from at home to the classroom to the presidency. But of course, part of why you've been recognized involves the word courage. And courage, as one of the ambassadors said in the introduction, partly has to do with fear and how to manage one's fear. And I think it also has to do with the profound challenges that are in front of you when you do this kind of work. And I wonder if you can talk to us a bit about the struggle and the suffering and the fear that come with forcing the kinds of conversations that you have introduced in Liberia, and the kind of reaction that you have received to that. But also, as you said, your own struggles and your own suffering that have shaped your politics. Can you talk to us about how do you manage that? How do you manage those challenges, and maybe how do you channel them into your work?
So one of the fears that I have to deal with is it's being isolated. So it's been named and excluded. So someone will say, but how? But you are isolated from spaces. You are further isolated from decisions making spaces, in a way where to shrink, to shrink the work that you do, to shrink your voice. So that has been one of the fear. But then again, every time it happens, I find where to go to be able to multiply. So for example, if I'm not going to multiply in a room of decision-making people, say stakeholders, I'm going to be able to multiply in the community. I'm going to be able to multiply in the schools, because those are where the changes I needed. So if I'm shouting loud on this call and I know whatever I'm saying is not going to make impact, it's not going to be agreed upon by those that are listening in this room or on this particular issue, where else do I go? How do I multiply? So it's not just me speaking. So it's being able to say that we can do this together. How do we do it? Creating that understanding and awareness amongst people that are affected by a particular situation, and people who also share your vision. So that's one way I've been able to continuously do the work that I do amidst the fear and the shrinking of spaces and voices for us. So I will give one. I've worked as a radio journalist as part of my forming years. For over 9 years, I started as a volunteer, and I used the media initially through my radio programs to be able to talk about the issues that matter to me, and obviously women's rights. So we did a lot of radio programs around women's rights and educating girls and women about their rights, but also stating, success stories of women and how they overcame. So that also helped to build a platform, or to give me a voice. So the meaning we came to the national scene and we got more involved in national advocacy, and we were now being considered opposition. We've been now being considered quote unquote people who don't like the government. That base had already been, that voice had already been created, so it's difficult, but again, you've worked and people have seen the level of work that you've done. So to discredit the work that we do is a little bit difficult, even though there are different ways that the system fights to strangulate us, but we're surviving. So that's one way I've been able to keep going on. And if we want to change in our society, we have a very youthful change. So some of the changes that we want to see, it has to be done through a lot of education and awareness. So I focus a lot on education and awareness at the grassroots level. So if I'm speaking at the national level about a particular issue, that's an issue that I have worked and mobilized around at the very bottom of the ladder. So there are people who coming up with you. And another thing that I've been able to do is to be able to build networks, to be in spaces. So I work and I built a lot of network. I work and support with a lot of other women and young women. So in different spaces, I've been able to continue to push the issue of women's rights, those issues that we are concerned about. And you realize you're not going to be the lone voice talking about it. Other people are going to start to realize what the issues are going to start helping you to call for accountability in different sectors and all of that. So for example, we did the rape campaign for the first time. We did a 3 days mass protest. But prior to that mass protest, we had the situation with a school, the Modern School, where there was a case of institutional rape. And for some reason, it happened around the time we were fighting Ebola and all of that. The case managed to go to trial, but it did not end. And a lot of other things happened. So when ProPublica did the documentary, and we were able to understand the depth of what had happened and the level at which the system wasn't accountable to the girls, and they weren't accountable to the parents. There was no report documenting how, the depth, the level of abuse that are happening. We went back to the networks and said, this is the situation. We need accountability. We need someone to say something to us. And because we have built the networks, because we have worked on the issue, it was easy to say the issues that we talk about every day. Yes, another issue was another situation of the lack of accountability. That was how we organized and were able to stage the Modeming protest. But that brought a lot of personal threats to our life. It brought a lot of verbal attacks from stakeholders, from people who, the very government, from people who were in the system, a lot of criticism, yes, which is welcome. We listened, we took out what we could learn, and then we continue to engage. But interestingly, we have not gotten any formal sort of redress to the Modeming incident. But within the last 3 years, we've had 2 to 3 of up to 4 other cases or incidences that repeated the Modeming. So we go back to the drawing board and say, this is what we talk about. We flash our petition statement, our acts, and say, this is what we asked for. We didn't get it. Yeah, and we back to the same situation. So the fact that what we fight for, always, the reality always presents itself, gives us, some consolation that even though we may be at risk, it takes a lot of putting yourself out there to be able to speak, but we get results and the picture gets more clearer, so we are not going to relent. But it is a very tedious task to be isolated, to be, now that we have social media, to be, bully on social media, to have your telephone line screens, people calling you, you don't know why they're calling you and making threats and all of that. I convinced that we are doing the right thing, so it keeps us going.
I mean, with this, this is so fascinating to hear about the process by which you do this work. And I wonder if you can talk to us. I mean, one thing that comes through very clearly is how much time and effort is involved in making this kind of social change. And so I wonder, how do you conceive of what success looks like, or how do you look for or identify achievements when you're doing work all the way from the classroom up to the highest levels of government? How do you understand? Can you give us an example of, or how you think about, what does it mean to then achieve something in this very long process?
So I will give an example of what happened of the 3-day protest. We had a recent 3-day protest in 2020. So when we started talking, we did the first protest, it was cringe, and people, a lot of people, women came out, yes, but there was a huge, backlash as to why we were doing what we did. We want to make the country look bad. We want to make the government look bad. And rape is not all that bad. What are we doing this? So we kept on doing what we had to do. But then when we had the increase in rape cases, sexual gender-based violence cases during COVID, a lot of other people joined in and started, even the young people, a lot of young people started planning and, taking visible action to speak out. So that's what success looks to me, that initially it was a few voices. And I remember once upon a time, it was just the WhipNet women. And before the WhipNet women was a few hand of women, senior women, big sisters, as we call them here, who were advocating. No one was joining them. They were maybe around, in small numbers, and it was just them. And it grew we became a part. It was still, the cycle was still small. No one was brave. You will want to protest, people will get angry about maybe some union, the union workers, for example, will have issues around pay and all of that, and they will stage protests. But to see a protest where people are on the streets and say enough of rape and sexual gender-based violence and violations of women's rights, people will not come, because number one, rape is not something that we should even be discussing in public. It should be secret. We should not destroy the family. We should talk this thing quietly, and people join. So for me, that's progress. And I will go back to 2005 when we started organizing. There were more than 3, 4, 5 young women-led organizations that were established to do advocacy. It was, just a lone handful of us who started talking, and so it was lonely, and there was this intergenerational gap where the older women have been involved in advocacy and all of that, but now to see younger generation, and then young women who we worked with in school, in different schools across different programs that we have now established their own organizations, and now leading activism activities across the country. They are involved. So for me, that's progress. The fact that we have more women organizing, we can now go in open spaces and talk about the issues that matter and what our opinions or recommendations are in terms of solution. That's progress for me. So if there's an issue around rape, for example, and there's not much done in terms of the referral pathway, I, Farcia, don't have to be the one who will go on the radio in the morning and say, no, let's have a break. We need SYC to be done. There are a lot of other people that are doing it. So for me, that's progress. Currently, we have a case in Liberia where the state is investigating the mysterious death of a young woman whose body was found around 2 p.m. May Day on her son at the back of a building material store. And the police came out and said there was no foul play. Before we could even utter a word, or a statement, young people were already on it and saying, the whole social media, that there was the whole way for saying, no, you cannot discover a body mysteriously and you come up within few hours and say there was no foul play. Where is the forensic or the autopsy? Why no autopsy? We do not accept that report from the police. And we just sat back and say, we smile like, that all that you've been working and talking about, engaging stakeholders about, people are now, they feel a little bit safe and inclusive. They have some information. They can now speak up and be able to stand up for themselves. So it's almost like what we've read about the great United States of America and how, they started, the civil rights movement started, and now more people are involved. So you see that happening before your own very eyes, and then you say, we are making progress. But then success will mean also for me that a woman will not endure violence and keep silent. She will be able to go to the courts, or she'll be able to seek help from different institutions or go to the police, report the violence rather than staying in and, and being shut down by family members who will say you don't want to report the man because you don't want to spoil the family name. We have to talk about this the family way. No, rape was used as a weapon of a war against women's bodies. And for a long time, the secrecy around rape, we don't want to talk about sex in the public. If you report a man or a family member who abused someone, you be seen like a name, somebody who want to destroy the family, you're not a good woman, and all of that. But now we have a lot of people reporting rape cases. They're no longer comfortable with, keeping it as a secret. They want to come and engage the justice system and get justice. Our greatest challenge is having the system to work. So the more we engage the system, the more we talk about it, and we see changes, even if it's not happening rapidly, but in behavior change, just by reporting and more people being willing to speak out and without fear of being shut down, for us, that is a success, and that how we gradually follow through with our advocacy. Yesterday, we had a situation here in Liberia. I was just explaining briefly to one of the colleagues online that the protesters were arrested. And I've been in protests before. I've suffered physical, brutality. And we went to engage the police, like, you have protesters here. We want to see how we can intervene. Went along with a lawyer. And they were saying, no, they are not going to be released. Why? The police state their grounds for release, but we were able to work and engage, and later on they got released. Had it been a few years ago, that boldness, wouldn't be there, or that level of engagement. So that's progress. The fact that you be able to, continuously do the work that you do, knowing that the system doesn't like what you're doing. People within the system, different actors, doesn't like what you're doing, but you will say, this is what I have to do, and I'm going to do it. They get tired with you. So you have to.
I mean, that sounds like great success to me. I mean, the last thing I want to ask you, Ms. Harris, is, I wish you could have been here with us in Minneapolis, but I think you've had the chance to talk to some Americans and some folks from Minnesota as part of this receiving this recognition. And so many of the problems that you describe in Liberia, they sound very familiar to me as an American woman. Silence around sexual violence, a criminal justice system that does not bring justice to those who really need it, and very persistent forms of inequality for women, especially women of color in this country. And so I wonder, given the remarkable success that you have had in your work, if you can share some of your advice with American feminists and American activists around how we can continue our struggles in this country, many of which I think are actually very similar. You may know we have not had a female president the way that Liberia has had, but there are many different ways in which I think we have a great deal to learn from you and your colleagues. And so I wonder, in closing, if you can give the American feminists and activists on this call some advice, given the remarkable work that you've done.
So we should continue to have in mind that the struggle that we are against is not isolated. So we always have to find the intercepts. So that's something we learning alone as we go, the intersectionality of all of what is happening and how the system, that is so controlled by patriarchy, we acknowledge that, and everything that we try to do, we recognize that nothing is happening in isolation of itself. So we have to be able to tackle everything at the same time. It may not be individuals working on all of the issues, but we should always try to find or connect on the work that we do and the reasons as to why these injustices and inequalities do exist, that we cannot let go of always going back to the root causes as to why they exist, and try to solve those problems from the very, very root causes. Because as we see, power is a very good and bad thing. So we ourselves in different positions of power should always try to be on the right side of the usage of power. to be able to bring about changes in the lives of marginalized people, in the lives of people who suffer injustices. So we are struggling with, we are continuously reflecting and dismantling power as we go along, because I have realized from where we are, if we do not dismantle the systematic powers and injustices, it's going to be very difficult to realize change in the lives of people and in our communities. So we cannot deal with the issues alone. We always have to find the linkages and tackle those linkages to be able to disconnect them and get results at different points. Right now in Liberia, even though we've had a female president, we produced the first female president in Africa, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and one of the very few around the world, we still are not equally represented in national leadership. Our statistics are very poor. We have a Senate that has 30 persons, 30 senators. Of the 30 seats, only 2 are women. And we had just come from 12 years of female rule. You would think, why is it that you have 2 women in the Senate? 2 women in the Senate is no vote. So anything around that borders around women's rights or what we are concerned about gets stuck or never pass if we do not struggle to build allies. In the House of Representatives, we have 8 women of 73 seats. So imagine what it is. So equal representation is something that we are far from achieving. That's not where we used to be. I know we had, we came up a little bit in 2005 when Madam Sirleaf won. In 2011, we stay at where we are, and we are in 2022. Next year, we are going to elections, and we still have the same challenges. So the same reason why people do not vote women easily to leadership, even in Liberia and in the United States, it's not different from the reason why they will violate women and see women as bodies, as objects, that they can prey upon. Those same mindsets do exist. So we have to work on those issues. So the same reason why a man will abuse a woman is the same reason why he feels that she should not be at a decision-making table. So my own thing, my own way, or our way of doing it is to be able to see how we continue to have in our work and apply our different strategies from an intersectional lens. That way we will continue to dismantle and make some, progress in all of the issues and inequalities that we are faced with.
Well, Ms. Harris, it is an absolute joy and a privilege to learn from you about what it means to dismantle patriarchy in an intersectional way. I think we are so fortunate to have been given this time with you, and I know we were hoping it was going to be a 3-way conversation, but to be honest, it's been, I could talk to you for hours, and I've been taking notes on the things you've been saying. So I'm incredibly grateful to you, Ms. Harris, and to Global Minnesota and to the State Department for making this event possible, and look forward to welcoming you to Minneapolis or up to seeing you in Monrovia one of these days. And I will pass it back to Mark now, and thank you so much again for such a wonderful conversation.
Farcia and Dipali, you were so powerful and so generous and so inspiring to all of us in the way that you shared stories and experiences, but also your insights, your wisdoms, the things that you've learned through all these different parts of life and the challenges that remain in front of us. Minnesota has a fantastic, and outside of Liberia, very large community of neighbors and friends and colleagues from Liberia. bringing their stories, bringing their talents, bringing their skills, bringing their futures, their entrepreneurship and everything into our community. And Farcia, you've brought another piece of that puzzle and that big picture to us. Thank you very, very much. And to all of our guests from around the planet, we hope that this kind of programming is important to you and you can find more programs on many different foreign policy topics, but you can get those at the Global Minnesota website. So anytime that you're looking, just go on Global Minnesota and there are lots of opportunities there coming up. For those of you who are members, know that your financial support is what makes this possible. And for our corporate members and our community members in our nonprofit world, thank you for your membership and your support. It's what makes these things possible. We are going to have a archived version of this. Our YouTube channel, Global Minnesota, has our previous guests who were International Women of Courage recipients and honorees in previous years. You might want to check that out. And please let us know things that you see in this world, opportunities and things that are of interest to you. Global Minnesota has 70 years. We're 70 years young, and we're preparing and looking ahead because the world is always going to be more complicated than it may seem when we wake up in the morning, more challenging, but also inspiring when we can hear folks like Farcia's stories that we've heard today. Thank you again. And appreciation to our moderator, to our panelists, and we'll bring Rue back to this screen one of these days when we can connect with her again from South Africa. Goodbye now, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.